All right. We finally made it. Finally made it. I am super, super happy. Joe Lansdale, welcome to Reader's Labyrinth, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. And Chuck Buda, how are you doing, sir? Doing good?
Doing great. Thank you very much for including me in this, and I'm a fan of your show, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. B.L. Blankenship. I guess this will be round 2 for us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm
That's
ready.
Right. That is awesome. And I would like all of our viewers to know that as our interview is going forth in this incredible authors roundtable, you will be seeing some links that will pop up on the screen. If you do not click them and at least check out the speaker's books, your computer may get a virus, or your iOS or your Android. I'm just going to throw that out there. So click the links. Save yourself a lot of hassle, and let's check them out and let's support them. So B.L. Blankenship, you reached out to me across Twitter, I want to say a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, sir. And I think you had an idea for this authors roundtable. Can you tell us about it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Western horror has been a thing for such a long time, and I see so many new authors coming out, and thought that it would really be good to have a show where it's not just like me or whoever just talking about, our next book or what have you, but the whole thing as a genre, because it is so widespread. You'll get a lot of these people. And by the way, both of these guys that are on here with me, we all know Westerns. That's why we're here. It's not just, hey, I wrote one Western book and I can say Blood Tomahawk is a good movie and can't name anything else. There's so much more to it than that. And you'll have a lot of people that kind of give advice, and here and there you'll hear that it's like that they don't know what they're talking about. You really have to honor those things that came.
Let me stop you there really quick, Bill. Okay. Are you saying that people on Twitter, when they talk about Western horror, they don't know what they're talking about? Because I think everyone on there is an expert.
I think that it varies. I think it's all over the place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
That's it. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, go ahead.
Go on.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. You
I
had a thought.
I was ready to jump right into it and just start spitting out facts, but
okay. Before we do it, I just kind of want to put my finger on the fountain before, all the wisdom is going to come gushing out. I would like to ask Joe a question. Ask a deep question. No. So, how would you define the genre of Western horror in general? And what are some of the elements of it? Because some of my viewers may have seen the B.L. Blankenship interview, but I've picked up probably 90 to about I'd say 80 to 90 viewers after that, and I'm not sure if they've seen it.
I don't really worry hard about trying to define it as a singular thing, that you've got to have, a monster, or you have to have horror, but you have to have a certain feel to it. It can just be eerie. It doesn't even have to have anything that happens that's obvious. In other words, you don't have to have a werewolf jump out of the trees. I've certainly done all of those things. A Magic Wagon I did is you can read it two ways. You can read it as the way this guy sees what's going on, the kid telling it, Buster Fogg, or who is kin, by the way, to the fog that was in Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. I didn't mention that, but that's what I thought of, that they were kinfolks. And anyway, but he sees it that way. But you can read it either way. You can read it as having fantastic elements, or you can read it as having, it's realistic, but to this kid, he interprets it a different way. He kind of accepts the storyline that they're telling him. So I liked it when you could do it both ways. And then I have a character named Reverend Mercer, and it's not both ways. It's obvious. It's, it's werewolves and strange things. It always takes some kind of odd Cthulhu thing or vampire or what have you. And then I approach it from a Western angle, and for me to make a Western good, it needs style. It needs style, and it needs somebody that has a true understanding of what the West was like. You can make mistakes, but make honest mistakes, not just, putting it in a sack and throwing it over the fence. I actually prefer straight Westerns to horror Westerns, but I love horror Westerns too, because I do love the other. And when I was growing up, my dad was born in 1909. And when you think about that, White Earp was still alive. Bat Masterson was still alive. Buffalo Bill Cody, Annie Oakley, all of them were still alive in 1909. And there's plenty of others that I can name. And so he came from a different era. So he had been passed stories down from his people who had been in the Civil War. I think probably he had uncles that were, that fought in the Civil War, older uncles. Because I think his dad was married about 5 times, and the uncles. And so we had a lot of relatives like that had all these stories. Well, you add to that my grandmother, who she was nearly 100 when she died. She saw Buffalo Bill's Wild West show when she was in her youth. And I think she may have seen the original one. She may have caught one of the variations of it that came along later. But she would tell me about seeing the Wild West show, but she also had ghost stories. She was Scotch-Irish, and she had all these ghost stories. And I remember hearing about how, when someone died, you opened the window so their soul could fly out like a bird. And sometimes it would be represented as a bird. And she had all these great tales, and my dad did too. So his were mostly, supposedly true stories, or certainly maybe folklore or legend passed down about Billy the Kid and Jesse James, the usual suspects. And then my grandmother gave me the horror elements, which I later just sort of welded. But a funny thing happened to me when I was younger. There was a movie called Curse of the Undead. Probably nobody knows that movie anymore, but it was an old black and white horror Western. And this was at the peak of Westerns like Rawhide. In fact, the guy who starred in Rawhide starred in this film. He died not long after that in an accident filming overseas. But when I saw that, it clicked. I just thought, wow, I like that. And so it inspired me to want to do a horror Western. And I'd also grown up on Jonah Hex. And now Jonah Hex, I remembered as having supernatural elements. And then later when I wrote Jonah Hex, I looked at the old issues and discovered I was wrong. But they were so different at the time from other Westerns that they struck me with this feeling that they were supernatural just because they were different. But I kind of combined all of those influences, and Bob Howard, Robert E. Howard, who's a Texan, and he wrote some good horror Westerns. And there were plenty of other influences, but those were the major ones. And I said, I'm going to write this story. And I wrote Dead in the West in 15 days. And, I sold it. It was serialized, and then I rewrote it better later for novel inclusion. And then later I did a screenplay, was optioned 11 times, and finally bought by this French producer who never made it. Bruce Campbell and Don Coscarelli tried to talk him into letting them do it. But in other words, he just decided to do nothing. But I made a lot of money. But the bottom line is that my influences come not only from books, not only from films, but from my people. My people were in the Old West. My grandmother came to Texas in a covered wagon. My wife's grandfather did the same. When he died, he was nearly 100. And this has been many years ago. And he worked for the Pinkertons. And so I've always felt like I was close to that. And also the language that people speak in the Westerns that I write. I can't promise you that I've got all that correct. And some of it I don't want to have exact because I want to be sure it's understood and accessible. But my parents, my dad being born in 1909, my mother being born in 1914, I believe, they had a different language than people now. And my language is somewhere between that and the influence of the 50s and the 60s when I grew up, and even other times. But you can still hear the echoes of the old East Texas in me, and they certainly had it. So all of those things for me, I don't think I could ignore at some point writing horror Westerns.
One thing I've always been fascinated with a bunch of the Western authors is that, it seems like there's a strong element that the writers of science fiction have, like a really detailed look at evidence, how the past really was, the living historical life of the people, who you're kind of pulling these elements from. I know when I did the my interview with BL, I was shocked at the amount of primary research that he's done. And just listening to you speak, Joe, as someone who majored in history myself, and I think about the voices from the past, this world that is no longer there, but it's still influencing us some way. I mean, I just find all of that, so fascinating and so wonderful to hear about as well. I mean, that is just absolutely spot
my father
on. I love
couldn't
all
read
of
or
that.
write. So he had the stories in his head. He couldn't read or write. And my mother could. My mother was a great reader. And, and I do remember having some relatives who talked about their people telling them about dime novels. I don't know that they ever read one, but I remember that. And I thought, what the hell's a dime novel? And so later on, I did research on that. People sometimes confuse them with penny dreadfuls, but they're not related. That's different. And on top of that, dime novels sometimes cost 15 cents.
There's a good historical fact for us, right? Well, hey, so
inflation.
Yeah, that's right. Especially with that, right? It's probably about $20 now. I don't think there's any more dime novels out there. Although the Kindle Vella, I think, is kind of filling a little bit of that gap, maybe. So Chuck, is there anything that you would like to add to what Joe's been saying over here? Any kind of thoughts that are swirling around?
Yeah, I too, like Joe, I grew up really at my father's side. I mean, he was a huge fan of Westerns and very widely read. So, I would always see all the Zane Greys and the Lemures and, Luke Short novels and stuff on his shelf. And then, of course, on Saturdays or Sundays, I don't remember which, we would watch Rawhide or Gunsmoke, Bonanza. Never really got into Bonanza for some reason, but the other shows I really liked, The Rifleman, of course. And then not long after that, he got me into the spaghetti westerns, obviously with Ennio Morricone and Clint Eastwood. And then it wasn't until I went to college, I actually took a course that was called Cowboys and Indians. And, our homework was to actually go, and this was when you could go to a store and rent movies. We would rent, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and Rio Bravo and all this stuff, and we would write papers on it. And read real books, by like Teddy Blue, the life and times of a cowpuncher and stuff, and really, really cool stuff, which further opened up my eyes. So, like Joe, I came more from the Western background, but I had a love of horror, obviously growing up reading, the Hardy Boys and Edgar Allan Poe and Stephen King. And I remember telling my father once that I was going to be a writer and I wanted to write horror stories. And he laughed at me. He's like, oh, horror. He's like, that's not real, write real literature and stuff. And so that's how I came into writing horror Westerns, was really to buy my father's approval. So I said, okay, well, I love Westerns and he does, and I love horrors. What if I mix them together and he'll actually read my stuff?
You see, Dad, you see, it's right there.
So it was,
yeah.
He had a lot of influence, and I was trying to win his approval. Not that I needed to. I mean, he always approved of me, but it was one of those daddy complexes, I guess I had. So.
well, I think it was Frank.
That's how I came about.
Well, I think it was Frank Herbert who said the two most powerful forces in the world is a young woman who thinks that she's in love and a young man trying to step outside of the shadow of his father. So I think that's kind of cool. I kind of thought about that when he said you decided to blend the genres there. BL, my man. I see some thoughts swirling around. That's it. I think you wanted to say something, and I rudely cut you off.
And then it finally quiets down.
That's right. I do not have a bedtime tonight, so I am good. I don't hear the 1-year-old little terrorist.
I do.
A little gremlin. Oh, yeah, sure.
Some grown-ups got to get up.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And Joe, if you need to, if you need to cut out of here, please feel free. You can grace us with the closing thing. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. All right, cool. BL, my man, what you got for us?
Okay. I agree with everything that they said. You know, when I was really first immersing myself into Western horror, and you ask people about like who is your favorite Western horror author, who is at the top of that hill, I'm going to be honest, it's Joe Lansdale. Joe, man, I mean, you do fantastic work. I've read several of your books now, and it's great. And I know that it's going to come back around to that, especially when we start talking about comics, because Joe's actually written comics. So that's something. I told you I'd made a few notes because I didn't want to leave out any highlighting things. There's so many things that you can mention in Western horror. It has to feel like a tone. It has to feel like a time. You know, they have some that are in Australia. I mean, even normal Westerns, you've got the Man from Snowy River, you know, it's an Australian and all kinds of things. So it's not necessarily a geographical thing, but it has to work. It could be in New York City, but at a certain point in time. I think the medium of film is huge. I'm going to say, because there's a lot of people that don't read, you know, The Walking Dead, it was a comic book series. It gets made into a TV show. It explodes. There's so many examples of that, you know, Twilight or the Hunger Games or whatever, and then it's made into a film and it explodes, and that's where it's reaching more people than it was. But before that, it was a book. I mean, hey, so was Jaws. But so when you look at Western horror, you have the early on. So this would come after the Penny Dreadfuls and whatnot, which Joe would know more about than me. I was looking into early films. I really like silent films in general, and I've not seen all of these, but I was fishing around of what would they have that's kind of an 1800s Western tone, and I'm building to one that like everybody that knows anything about film probably has heard of. But the early on, I found in 1895, they had a film. It was The Execution of Mary Surratt. There's also an amazing Robert Redford film about that. But the 1895 film, first film ever to have a special effect in it, stop motion animation. This is what I read. I've not seen it. I'm assuming it has to do with her being hung. In 1899, they had a movie called Kidnapping by Indians. I guess we all know what that's about. They had really vivid names back then. There was a movie that has nothing to do with this called The Devil's Mother-in-Law. So, yeah. In 1903,
a perennial.
Uncle Tom's Cabin. You know, Uncle Tom's Cabin, presuming that that's like the book, it certainly has some horror elements, specifically towards the end with the guy trying to chase down the slaves with the dogs and whatnot. The Great Train Robbery. The next year, the Great Train Robbery was such a big thing. So you've got gun violence, you're robbing a train. They had the Little Train Robbery. And then in 1910, they had a movie called The Fugitive. I know that there's some federal soldiers or whatever. I just watched like a little clip of it. But what I was building up to is one of the most famous movies, and it certainly has horror elements in it, in American history, and it's kind of famous for some bad reasons. Birth of a Nation. It also was the first movie to spawn a cinematic length sequel, which is lost, and I believe it's called Fall of a Nation. And America wasn't really doing too much stuff. It's alternate history stuff, and Germany came and invaded us and all of that. But Birth of a Nation was based on, it was made in 1915. It was directed by D.W. Griffith, and it was based on a book called The Klansman, which was part of a series trilogy by Thomas Dixon Jr. That trilogy went The Leopard Spots 1902, The Klansman 1905, The Traitor 1907, and while they're really fantastically well written, they're totally racist. But that's what you have. A Birth of a Nation, the first half of that movie, would totally line up with what they would teach you in school today. It goes through the stuff. Lincoln's assassinated. After that, it turns into black people terrorizing the South, and the heroes of the movie being the Ku Klux Klan, a bunch of people who were treated bad when the new government came in because they can't be a part of it, so they're indignant, so they put on the robes and whatnot, and they basically run off all of the rampaging black people from the area. That has elements of terror, even though all the people were white and blackface, by the way, at that time. So you certainly had things from that time. also Westerns and things of the 1800s nature. They've always been a part of American culture, not just the historical stuff, but the fictionalized cowboy that tends to be white. You know, there were a lot that were Mexicans, there were a lot that were black, there were a lot that were Native American. But nonetheless, the persona, the wild and free cowboy, has to do a lot with America. And it's easy to tie violence or horror into that, because the cowboy is associated with a gun and associated with violence, and ergo horror is an easy case to make. You want to dance that around before I name modern anything?
Well, you know, one of the first dime novels, I can't think of the exact name. It's something like Malwaken. But anyway, it's about, it has like a subtitle, The White Trader's Indian Wife. And I think that may be the very first dime novel in 1860. And the reason I mention that is we're talking about the West, and this was really before we think of the West being, but in a sense, the West really began as soon as we started moving west from the East. And New York at one point was the West. All of that area around there was the West, because we didn't know what was out there till Daniel Boone and some other people like him went out of there and started looking around and finding different places and kept expanding. And I've always thought it was ironic that you have Bat Masterson, who was in the West and died in New York, you know, in I think 1921. I'm a little uncertain of that, maybe 22, but he died at his desk he was a writer, he was a reporter, and he died writing about the poor. And they, you know, he literally had his nose in the keys. And I've always thought that was interesting, that this guy became a famous reporter, especially in sports. But he also wrote, you know, articles and different kind of things like that. And I think the one he was writing about then, what is it he says? He said the rich man has his ice in the summer and a poor man has his in the winter. And he had just written about that much of it, and then he died. So I've always thought how ironic for this guy to come from what at one point in time was the West out to where we think of as the West, and to end up back in New York and to die as a reporter. And he's the one that we got a lot of our information about gunfighters from, because he knew all of them. And of course, some of them were still alive, like White Earp. And, you think of Luke Short. Luke Short was actually a gunfighter. And I think it was Frank Giddings was the writer, I believe. Is that his name that took the Luke Short name? Anyway, he used that to write all of his Luke Short novels, which were really quite good, by the way. But it's such a wonderfully, maybe this is the wrong phrase, but it's a wonderfully incestuous sort of storyline, all of these different things from the West. And a lot of times people don't think there was a bicycle corps in the West. It didn't last long, because by then cars started coming in. But for a while, they tried to trade in horses for the cavalry with bicycles. And they went on, an expedition with bicycles, and they would fix flats and all sorts of stuff. And other things that people don't know is that a large percentage of the Indian fighting was done by black soldiers. You know, they were done by the 9th and the 10th Cavalry out in West Texas and elsewhere. But, you always see the John Wayne movies, which I love, by the way. But you always see those, but you very rarely see, unless it's Sergeant Rutledge that John Ford did with Woody Strode, you very rarely see the black faces in those old films unless they're cooking or cleaning or some sort of thing like that. But they were the ones who fought the Indians, or at least a large percentage of them, the Buffalo Soldiers. And therein is just this whole great story that's been ignored. And there were Asian cowboys, there were Hispanic cowboys. Obviously, I think they taught a lot of us in the West and in the white cowboys how to be cowboys, because they were there first and they were doing it. So to me, you got such a pool of things to call on besides just, I'm going to put some horror in a Western. You've got history. You've got history, and you've got ways to twist history if you want. But a lot of people don't know about that. And they don't know the legends in the West about the giant pterodactyl that was out in, I think it was Arizona, was the story anyway, that the guy encountered a pterodactyl that ate his friend. And ate some other guy. I imagine he shot his friend.
Fascinated. Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. What? Oh my gosh. That's like a Thunderbird? Is that like?
Yeah. Well, that's one.
Oh,
that thunder
wow.
was described with
That's one.
what's a quotal. Obviously, I don't actually believe it happened, but I like it. And in the late 1800s,
yeah, you do, Joe. Yeah, you do.
At Aurora, Texas, was a flying saucer story in the late 1800s, where supposedly the aliens buried there at Aurora, which I kind of doubt, but it's a good tourist thing. But the story has been around a long time, and there were all kinds of stories like that, Bigfoot stories, and the Bigfoot story originally was not the original one, but the one when they really started reporting it was this: people were out in the woods. I forget I think they were mining, and they were attacked by Bigfoot, according to their story. And they were in a cabin, and they were attacked all night because I think they took a shot at one, maybe even killed one, according to their tale. And but anyway, all of those tales are just rich material to go any kind of way you want with the Weird Western.
That's incredible. Like, it seems like, me being an outsider, I suppose, and listening to you speak, it's like the genre just keeps getting one layer after another. I mean, there's some spiritual stuff going on. There's some high strangeness going on. And, at least with me kind of being, having a very light appreciation. And in full disclosure, the only Western novel I ever read was The White Buffalo. And that was after I saw the movie with the Charles Bronson, I think. That's and BL stuff too. I've read, but what I love about it is like the sense of like the fading away of the pre-modern world, and as the modern world is kind of like emerging onto the stage, and it's like there's people, there's events, there's cultures, and they're like kind of caught in the confluence of history. And I kind of think about our past when, we migrated up from Africa or whatever you happen to believe, but as we displaced the world that was there and these wild lands, these dark lands, and we brought our technology in, all of the Western genre kind of has that feel to it. Like we're doing this just like we've entered the uncanny valley. And like, there's kind of weird stuff happening from like space and time. It really depends on what you do next.
The Valley of the
speaking
Guanji.
of the Western, the Valley of the Guanji. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. There we go. So Chuck, is there anything that you would like to add, sir? I saw you nodding your head pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is like right in my wheelhouse. I mean, I could talk about this stuff for weeks, but, and what's more horrific than man? An underlying theme in not only my Western horror, but in my classic Western books, and also in my straight horror books is man. I think man is really the biggest monster that's ever roamed the earth. I dabble in the supernatural and Sasquatch and all that stuff, but going back to the West, especially at all the things that we fight today, law and lawlessness and who's writing the laws and who's following them, our hopes and dreams, our battles about freedom, greed, all that stuff, I think is super rich, not only in modern history, but in Western times. I mean, any era really, but what I really love about the Western horror aspect is dipping your toes into that, and how it really expands beyond that era into modern times and goes back even further to ancient times. All those tenets, I think are so much can be done with it, whether you use a monster or not. It's what makes us human, and the storytelling around that. And like Joe alluded to, you go back to the Indians telling their stories, around the campfires and everything. And it's just given us all this rich material, and there's just so much that you could do with it. I mean, you could go forever, telling new tales.
What is it about the West? I mean, we can all talk and opine about it. Is it the time period in American history? Is it world history? Is it just, is it something that is is possibly a unique feature of the United States itself. Like, whenever I read about the West, I think, you know what? I don't think something like this could have happened in Tsarist Russia or Ottoman Turkey or Habsburg Austria. You know, there's just something, there's this quintessential, these elements of a quasi-anarchic society, wildlands that haven't been tamed by Western civilization yet. And I don't know. I mean, there's just something so peculiar about the West. You know, does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got a little bit. You can stretch it and you can put it in, other places. You can put it in Australia and things like that. But it's really unique to hear at least the big picture of the Western. It is, we invented the Western. I mean, we had like William S. Hart and Tom Mix, who my dad used to watch, when he was a kid in the films, and would tell me about those. And for a long time, the only way you could see a Tom Mix film outside of the 1 or 2 talkies he did was in Czechoslovakia. I think now there are more silent films out there, but a lot of them were destroyed or lost. But William S. Hart had this, connection to the real West. And it's funny that these are silent films, but when you see those and you see how they're dressed and you see that's actually closer to how the West looked than we think of, like, the Lone Ranger and people like that with stylized clothes. They usually wore these big Stetson hats because they kept your head cool. They were tall for that reason. That's why they were, had that high crown, or sombreros had that wide brim. That was to keep the sun off of you. And all of those little bitty things, I just think, are the fascinating part about it. And the fact that what a lot of people don't realize, if you watch a Roy Rogers film or you watch a Gene Autry film, you'll have these guys are riding in cars, they got a phone, and here comes an airplane. And guess what? A lot of that was just that way in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We had phones in the 1800s. People don't realize that. Not the early 1800s, but later on we had automobiles before 1900. Not many, but we had them. And it's interesting to realize all of it's Roy Rogers and all that were like alternate universes when I watched them. But the more I read history, the more I realize they were pretty damn accurate sometimes. You'd have the stagecoach stop so they could like use the phone or something like that. So some of it could be stretched out pretty far. Gene Autry he would go down with the Phantom Empire, would fight Atlantean robots down in the center of the earth, but he would always make it back to Melody Ranch in time for his radio show. So maybe that's not so true. But the fact that you had all of these different elements, there's planes in there dropping dynamite and things of that nature. Some of that stuff did overlap into the early 1900s, and people always have this. It's usually like 1880 like 1870 until about 1890, 1900, and it's done. But that isn't true. Even when we went into Mexico after Pancho Villa, that was a cowboy war. That's what they called it. And that was in the early 1900s. My friend William F. Nolan, who wrote Logan's Run, his father was the first one to drive a car from the United States into Mexico. And he did that during that pursuit of, he was in the Army. He did that in pursuit of Pancho Villa.
Damn, what? Really?
Oh, wow. And one thing you said.
What a connection to history.
Yeah. The White Buffalo. Yeah, yes, you mentioned The White Buffalo. It's one of my favorite novels. White Buffalo is really well researched when it comes to Native Americans and Wild Bill Hickok. Less so in the movie, but I enjoyed the movie. I mean, I like Bronson, but he wasn't my idea of Wild Bill Hickok. But the book is just fantastic. It's tremendously detailed, and when you read that book, you feel like you have actually time traveled to the Old West. And it was written by Richard Sale, who wrote The President's Analyst, and he wrote all of these pulps about a reporter called Daffy Dill. And, he was like a real professional, but you could tell that when he wrote that novel, he said, to hell with it, I'm going for the gold. And it should have got more attention than it did, to be honest.
The movie itself is definitely a cult classic. I mean, it's very rare that I've run across someone who has seen the White Buffalo, let alone read it. I know it's like you said, it certainly hasn't received the airtime that it deserves. I think
gorgeously done and so smart and so well researched.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, it certainly was. BL, is there anything you'd like to add, sir, about it? Or
I think that's good.
Well, so I have a question for you guys. What year or time period do you think the West actually ended? Because we can all agree, like, hey, you know what? In the late 1880s, something was there.
I'd stretch it.
Early 1900s. Okay, sure.
You, like I say, you had
really?
the
okay.
War. You had World War I, which in what was it, 1918 or something ended. But that was also kind of a cowboy war. I mean, if you ever see the history about it, that was horses. They were using horses a lot. And my father rode horses as a child. And where he went, they had buggies. My grandmother used to tell me about a story, and she was somebody who rode around in buggies and wagons and things of that nature. But she told me a story about when she was young, and you'll find this story, J. Frank Dobie talks about it. So it's kind of like a universal legend, but everybody got it from old Aunt Bill or something, or Aunt Bill, Uncle Bill. But it's they were in the mountains, and they were coming along in a little buggy late at night trying to get back home. And then they realized something was following them, and they couldn't quite make it out, but they could see the shadows behind them. And as they came around the corner and the moonlight hit, they realized it was a panther, and the panther was stalking them, and it was getting closer and closer. So what they did, they had a baby with them, and they started throwing out the baby's clothes, and the panther would stop and maul the clothes. And so they were able to get away because it kept stopping, which is reminiscent of some African legends and reminiscent of a number of other legends where they do something to stop them. Even in vampire legend, there's sort of things where you could throw out certain things like, I don't know if it was coins or marbles, and the vampire had to stop and count them, which I've always thought he's like, talk about the obsessive compulsive story. You have a vampire, he can't move on without counting these items. He had to stop and count them. And you don't see that in much vampire lore. But if you read, I think it's the Vampire, His Kith and Kin, there's a lot of information in there that I've always... Yes. Right. And you can use it in Westerns. And I've used some really weird... Montague Summers wrote that, I think. And you, if you look at all that stuff, it just makes Westerns could be so much richer. And that Panther story, I've used it. You know, and what was so funny, I was reading one day, and there it was in a J. Frank Dobie book, a collection of old legends and stories. And I was shocked, you know, because he was kind of like the major Texas writer when I was growing up. You know, we had like two or three, but he was the main guy. And he is a fantastically interesting writer. I think that there have many come along since, like McMurtry. And, you know, and he wrote a weird Western, Anything for Billy. You know, it's a weird Western. So there's a lot of good stuff there that you can add to these things. And some of them just fit, you know, just like a hand in a glove, you know.
So, Chuck, I think a vampire made an appearance in one of your novels. Desert Fangs, was it? Was that the...
Actually, Corral of Blood. Desert Fangs was a chupacabra.
Okay. Okay. All right.
But yeah,
I would say the same thing, but I'd get killed.
Yeah, no, you know, it's hard because it's kind of like musical notes. Everybody has gone before, you know, and done this stuff. So what I try to do is do a little something different and have like a vampire battle a witch. And they had, you know, crossed paths in New Orleans before getting to Tombstone, Arizona. So the battle at OK Corral is really between you know, the vampire and the witch's coven. So, you know, that's where I tried to do something different.
Well, I like the witch. You know, don't use it, but my son co-wrote one, The Pale Door, that uses witches. It was filmed 2 or 3 years ago. I forget when, but it uses witches as protagonist or antagonist, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I like that. I watched that recently, actually, thanks to BL. He highly recommended it. So, yeah, I mean, you know, there's so much that can be done with all of that stuff. The vampires, chupacabra. I worked in some Bigfoot. Of course, you know, the first one that I did, Curse of the Ancients, was really stretching kind of ancient curses from. Thank you. ancient curses
there we
from
go.
an Indian tribe, and they cursed one of their own, and of course, he the Indian or the Native American is trying to fit in, and his own people have rejected him, and then the white man, of course, rejects him. So, that has a lot of layers to it. So, I don't know, ghosts. I've tried to do a little bit of everything, but like I said, you have all these people who have gone before you. Joe, obviously, Jonathan Mayberry, Christopher Ruffy. I mean, I can look at a whole list of people who I look up to as I'm the one standing on the shoulders of giants and just trying to tell something new. But really, there's so much great stuff out.
Well, when I started, there was none. That doesn't mean there hadn't been some before, and that are a few here and there, but there was no real movement as far as like weird Westerns. It was sort of like me and the wind. I had read a few. There was one I can't think. It's called Montana something. I can't remember, and it was a strange Western. I read a few here and there, and most of them I found after I wrote mine because people would say, "Well, there was this," and then there's the Hawkline Monster by Brodigan, which is actually a psychedelic Western, a drug Western is really what it is. But when I was doing it, the nature of that kind of thing, as we are identifying it, just didn't exist, and nobody wanted it. I mean, nobody wanted it. When I wrote that novel, I had to end up having a small press do it serialized, and then I revised it for another small press that wanted to do it. And then now it's been in print numerous times, and it's changed. But back then, nobody wanted that. They go, "You don't mix Westerns and horror." And I said, "No, you don't mix them. You blend them." See, I don't believe in this whole thing, horror and Western. I got horror and I got some Western. That's not the idea. It's not a fruit salad. It's like putting it in a blender. If it doesn't feel natural, if it just feels like you took two genres and tried to run them together, that doesn't work for me. I come across a lot of that. And people say, "See, look, I mix genres too." No, you don't. You collide genres and they don't work, because I can see the separate genres going on instead of it being this, this sort of blend, like martial arts, like anything that you do well, it blends. And I think that's the thing that most weird Western writers or whatever should, keep in mind, is that they have to find a point where they have natural connection. Not just that they've been hammered into place, because then it doesn't read right to me.
Joe, it sounds to me like,
I should mention Ron Kelly too, because he's obviously from the South and has written a lot of weird Westerns as well.
It sounds to me like Joe, BL, and Chuck. It sounds like you guys aren't really paying attention to the constraints of a genre. It sounds like you're just kind of writing from this deeply authentic place, is what it sounds like. And because just to kind of sum up what you said, Joe, is to write authentically. Don't try and write with this artificial construct to it. And whenever you use the words blending, I would add a layer on top of that, is that a novel that a reader could get and say, "Hey, know what? This shit could actually happen." And you know what? If we live in a universe that is infinite, then anything is possible. And hey, if there was really a monster, it would be in the Wild West. I could see a vampire travel into the Wild West.
Well, you look at it like strange, this.
Yeah.
Look at it like this. And they had a lot of superstitions in the Wild West, so it's perfect, But you look at it like this. If you take a fruit salad, you can see the grapes, you can see, the pears, the peaches, whatever. But if you blend it, all you see is one thing. And that's kind of the difference. And I know, and I don't tell other people to do this. This is their own business. I write like everybody I know is dead. And what I mean is, I don't write for agents. I don't write for editors. I have done some things where I needed to make money. I had to buy a car once, and I wrote 3 ghosted novels. Well, not ghosts, pen name novels. And I've done stuff like that before early in my career. But for the most part, at some point I realized I wasn't doing too well by trying to chase markets. So I just said, screw the markets. And I started writing for me. And that's when I came up with the idea. I write like everybody I know is dead. Instead of sitting here, I wonder if my friend Bill will like this. Well, fuck Bill. I wonder if my agent.
Oh, yes. Yes. I love it.
And you got to ignore that. Now, that may not be the way to financial success. For me, it was, but I can understand, but it took a while. It took a while for sure until I became my own genre kind of. But I think I became that by doing just that and writing like everybody I know is dead. Now, for some people that may not blend. They may need to look at a market and go that way. But I do believe that most people, when they do that, they write like everybody else, or they write like they expect it to be written. And I always, my friend Andrew Vax, who died a couple of years ago, we were talking about that one day. He said, well, who do you want to be, Muddy Waters or Barry Manilow? And I thought, I want to be Muddy Waters. But if you want to be Barry Manilow, then you don't, that's not the approach to take.
Well, that's incredible because, I've kind of heard that, the advice to write authentically, to write for yourself is a phenomenon that's kind of happened in the past 5 or 10 years with Kindle and Amazon. But I mean, just listening to you, it solidifies this sage wisdom that's out there. And, I've long believed as a reader that markets are artificial constructs, that it doesn't reflect the true interest of readers nor of authors. Because how many people in the 70s, 80s, and 90s would have loved to read books that would blend genres, that would have just because, I think that fiction tells the truth better than nonfiction. And I think that we live in a reality. Yeah. And we live in a reality that isn't separated by boxes and walls. Like there's a hidden, there's this unity to everything. And, there's a Native American saying about fire that it's always changing, yet always the same. And, kind of talking about the unity and chaos and order. There's this hidden order in it. And what I love so much about writers that I'm meeting and interacting with, BL, you Chuck, and some, my guest on here is like when they're writing from a place of authenticity. I mean, it's a real story. I mean, with real people in it. And, as a reader, I think that we are entering another golden age of writers is what I'm thinking. I think with word processors, with the internet, with everyone, I mean, us being able to sit down and kind of absorb the wisdom from Joe here. I think that, this is a golden age of books is what it is. And, I've always said that. Yeah.
Go ahead, man. I was just going to say it is, but there's also a real hard drive for conformity. And the problem with a lot of self-publishing is that most of it's not any good, which is okay. You can sort it out, but I'm not against self-publishing, but I'm not like a big fan of things that aren't vetted. And one of the things I loved about the old days is you might think an editor was full of it, but when you sent it to them and once it was sold and you were paid for it, it was vetted. Now, that didn't mean it was good because it was paid for or because an editor liked it, but it meant more than if I could just publish it myself and send it out there. Now, am I knocking that? No, people can do it. I've had a couple of things like that myself I've done. But in general, I think that's one of the things that's wrong with it is that if anybody can be published, then we have all of this. There's no gate minders who say, you know what? We can't sell this. Even though you're writing for yourself, you do want somebody at some point to pay you for it. And if you want to be like Lovecraft and never make a dime, that's okay too. But I'm not like that. I have a family and I want to make money, but I want to make it in my own, way. I want to make it on my own merits, not somebody else's merits. And people told me I'd never do that. And I did do that in a relatively short time. And I also didn't specialize in one field, which is one of the things they tell you when you first start writing, at least in my day, is that you need to make up your mind, Joe. Are you a suspense writer, a crime writer, a horror writer, or whatever it is, a Western writer, a historical writer? And I said, I don't want to make up my mind because I would become boring. For me, I'm worried about me. I'm narcissistic in that point that I don't want to get up every morning and write something for somebody else. every damn day. You know, I have friends that are bestsellers and are happy with it, but I have others who say, I just hate this. I get up every morning and I'm writing the same goddamn book every year with very little variation. And, you know, I have a series where there are things that happen, Leonard, where there are things that, you know, reoccur. But, you know, I like to make those different. And if I feel like that I'm getting tired of that, I take a break. I've taken breaks 4 years, 8 years. I've done everything that I shouldn't do to be a super millionaire. And I've actually come out pretty good. You know, I've had friends who've made the other trip. Some of them are happy with it, some aren't. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that when I was 4 years old, I read a goddamn comic book and said, you know what? I want to do this. I want to write this. I wasn't thinking about career because I didn't know what a career was. I was thinking about writing stories, and I was trying to draw them. I unfortunately had no art talent, but I did find that I could write better stories. So I'm living my dream, and I don't think everybody gets that. You know, I'm a martial artist. I wanted that since I was a child, and I'm a good one. And I'll say that without feeling immodest at all. And I'm
not going to test it.
I'm a pretty decent writer, you know, and I've done that for a long time. But decent or not, I've done it my way. Frank Sinatra, cue Frank Sinatra. I've done it my way, and I have, you know, made myself happy and been able to feed my family and house my family. All the things they say you can't do, you can do. Now, would I peck shit with the chickens for my family? I would if I needed to. And maybe I would write some pen name stuff. But what I'm saying is that you've got to have some sort of confidence in yourself. And you've got to have some sort of confidence in the things that you want to write, so that when you sit down with them, you say, I'm excited. And if you're excited, 9 times out of 10, someone else will be. Although there are certain areas where some people are just so unique that they're never going to have a large audience. So, I mean, I'm realistic about that. But for me, it works very well.
Well, we are all very happy and thankful for your success. And I agree 100% with you. I like gatekeepers. And what I've seen happen in what I like to call the new golden age of writing is the gatekeepers moved out of the city of New York when it was the big 14, then it was the big 9, then it was the big 6, then it was the big 4. And it is shifted into the hands of readers themselves now. Because you are right, there is a ton of self-published stuff out there that is just absolute dog shit. I don't even know how, it ever saw the light of day. But what you do see is that readers are selecting the authors. You know, the cream is rising to the top on Amazon. And you have the Kindle Vella series. Most of those are self-published authors. Now, is everything that's in the top 100, is it going to be, a Robert Frost level? No, it's not. But what I'm seeing is quality authors are being selected by readers again. And there's more and more readers, I think, that are getting back into it, as TikTok, as podcasts, as YouTube, which I hope it's not going to be the fall of YouTube. But as social media, as these companies are kind of running their course, it's kind of like returning to a hot meal or putting it back in the microwave. A lot of them are picking up reading again. And so the gatekeepers, I think, they are.
And like ebooks, which they thought
a ton of hardbacks, yeah.
They've dropped down to like 25%.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that will continue to climb again, but people were shocked. They started selling hardbacks. It's the same as like vinyl records, I think. It is more authentic. I'm not against the other. I read the other too, but I think that there is an authenticity about it. I wouldn't listen to a vinyl record. I don't want to. I get them all scratched. I've already been through that. I didn't like it.
You've already been through
it. I understand the appeal. I mean, the people, I can hear the better sound. Well, I can't. I'm not that attuned. My daughter probably can because she's a professional singer. But for me, is that books are more authentic, but I'm not opposed to other ways of presenting them, ebooks,
for sure,
whatever.
For sure,
I'm not opposed to other ways of telling stories, films, comics, what have you. I think the more the merrier. But I do agree with you that there is a revolution and a renaissance in writing, in that when I first started, you did not mix genres. That was understood. If you wrote a science fiction novel, it was a science fiction novel. It might actually have framework of a Western in space, but it was a science fiction novel. And a Western novel was a Western novel, and never the twain should meet. And that's when I started. That's how it was. So in that sense, people, I do think, are more willing to blend.
That is totally awesome. BL, is there anything that you would like to add, sir?
Right. Yeah. Totally. What he was saying about blending, it's like food. If you were going to make something Italian, you'd put things in Italian that goes in Italian. When I started writing Western horror, and I do market myself as the Chick-fil-A of Western horror, because that's what under BL Blankenship, I'd put it under a different name if I was writing something else. That's what it is. I'm the unofficial spokesperson, unofficial meaning unpaid, for Death's Head Press. Frankly, if somebody thinks, hey, I like Western horror, what's good for that subgenre, or really subsect of a subgenre, is good for everything in it. I say subsect of a subgenre because Western horror is Weird West. Sci-fi Western. Weird West is any Western that's not traditional Western. Revisionist Western, sci-fi Western, The Dark Tower, whatever. That's what it is. It has picked up. Recently, I just watched the English on Amazon. That's there. This episode is being filmed in 2022, the month of November, and I believe at the end of this month, that's when Night of the Tommyknockers is supposed to come out. That is a bunch of boogery things coming out from the mine shafts in the Old West. It looks awesome, by the way. They've got the trailer on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
Prey. A Predator thing that was I've not watched it. They said that was one of the best ones in the franchise.
Yeah.
Have you all seen it?
I've seen it. I don't think it's a masterpiece or anything. It's fun. They did an interesting thing. They were shooting their bows like that, and I don't think the Comanche actually did that. But I think they thought, well, that looks cool, and it did. But it's a nice change of pace. I mean, I quit watching Predator a long time ago. I was on the set of one of the Predator movies, and I never saw it. So to me, it was a nice change of pace, if nothing else. And the lady who starred in it was fantastic.
They've had Westerns all through the history of America, and Westerns with horror elements. There's some Gunsmoke episodes and whatnot. I did have a list of movies. The list only contains the prominent ones. If you said to me, Ben, I need you to find 100 Western horror movies, I think I could. I believe that there's that much out there. I'll rifle through these. Brimstone is my favorite. Brimstone is about a psychopath, hypocrite preacher that wants to marry and consummate the marriage with his daughter, Dakota Fanning. It's a great movie. It's really dark. It's based on a series of comics or graphic novels. I've talked to the director, who's actually looking at some of my short stories for film. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's cool. There's a lot of close misses. I've worked in music, and also I've had a lot of that. The Nightingale's in Australia. It's I spit on your grave. She's Irish. She finds an Aborigines man to help her hunt down the Englishmen that killed her husband, her baby, and violated her to kill them. And she says, they look at me and you as the same. It's awesome. My favorite scene in it is when the Aborigines guy puts like the makeup on his face and gets the sharp stick. It is go time. Never grow old. There are these bad people that come to a town. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. What are you going to do? It really just keeps feeling like they're amping up the heat. I have to mention again, Blood Tomahawk, because that's the one that people that really don't watch a lot of Western horror seem to know about. Neolithic kind of Indians making women into what's the word? They're cutting off their arms and legs and mating with them forcibly. The Keeping Room. I like that. That goes Civil War. So the Civil War, not to go into a bunch of history, but the North came and they invaded the South. That's the way that the war works. So you had these Southern people that fought for the South. So their homes are being left abandoned. They had groups of people called bummers, It wasn't like the whole Union Army, but it was like terrorist cell groups. The South had guerrilla units that kind of aggravated people. There were some really bad dudes, by the way, that joined the war for selfish reasons. It is about these 3 women, one a slave, in a house, and these guys invade it. And so it's like a home invasion thing. I love it. The Beguiled, I like both versions of it. Clint Eastwood's in the original. Man, he's a Union soldier. He's wounded. He goes amidst these Southern women, and they help him heal up, and they're crazy. That's the short. The Hateful Eight.
The one that fits what you're saying, Ben, is there's the Quigley Down Under, and it's got mystic elements from. It's an Australian Western, but it's got mystic elements from Aborigines in it. It's not really a horror Western, but it does have that aspect to it. So you can stretch it pretty far if you want.
Yes, Hateful Eight. That's Quentin Tarantino. That's really dark. That's really gritty. It goes into the kind of human monstery sort of thing. You're kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. The movie that everybody and their cousin told me that I should watch, and I just recently saw here, is called Ravenous. Has everybody here seen Ravenous?
Very good.
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yeah. I've seen that. I loved the soundtrack too in Ravenous. That was so great, and just the sound of the wind blowing across the rocks. Whenever they were in the cave sequence, when he was having the flashback to a story, and you could hear like the water in the background. I mean, really good audio track to it. Yeah.
The Wendigo, that thing goes several places with stuff. The Wind is one that I saw.
Oh yeah.
When I was a kid, I read
The
Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood, which is an absolutely wonderful story. And Arthur Machen and all these I always thought they were better than Lovecraft. I mean, I think Lovecraft borrowed from them, but I like Lovecraft's creations, but I'm not a big fan of his writing. But I always thought that Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen, man, that stuff was creepy.
Oh, yeah, Arthur Machen.
But except for that, you never heard about the Wendigo until recent years, and now it's popping up a whole lot. In a lot of things I've seen, there's the Wendigo, Yeah.
The Wind, it's Demons of the Prairie, is what that's about. I was
what year did that come out, Ben?
Not too many years ago. Why I was drawn to that, and by the way, the Old West, Kansas, that's Boot Hill and everything. I drove an 18-wheeler through there when I was driving over the road for a job. I did that for a year, and the wind never stops blowing, and it gets so miserably cold. And I thought, how miserable would that have been to be in Kansas in the Old West? It's flat and desolate. The state
is it based on the Dorothy Gilman novel? Is it based on the Scarborough? No, is it Gilman or Scarborough? Is it based on that novel? There was a silent version of The Wind, and I don't know if it's the same one or not. It starred Lillian Gish, and even though there's no demons, the wind becomes demonic in a sense, and she's losing her mind because the wind is constantly blowing. It's blowing dust and stuff up under the doors, and that Lillian Gish silent film is absolutely terrifying and creepy and bothersome to you because it's just so relentless, and I wondered if this new The Wind is based on that. I have a feeling it might be, but they may have jacked it up and ran a demon under it. I don't know, but
you have a smoke monster.
What's that?
Yeah, you have a smoke monster. You've got a person that's a demon that their eyes go black. You've got some wolves that chase somebody in a house. Yeah, that's it's that kind of thing. That person finds a little kind of like a track almost that's about the demons of the prairie, and it's just got some creepy dark elements in it. I saw several older movies recently. A Man for Hanging. You've got this psychotic man, and he's got like this leather patch over his eyes, terrorizing people. I think it's done great. It's like from the 70s. Cutthroat 9. I love the trailer that they say that it comes with a terror mask for people who can't stand the terror of the movie. Super violent. I really thought one of the most disparaging movies that I have seen in a long time was Mandingo. Really violent movie. People really abusive to slaves, having them fight to the death. All kinds of stuff. It keeps getting worse and worse and worse. The whole movie does. It really has dark vibes. a movie that people name, because I'm naming all these human monster things. You find movies like The Burrowers or Dead Birds.
Oh yeah,
those are both Western horror. They're monster creature features
a lot.
Yeah. Exit Humanity is a great Civil War. It's a Western horror zombie movie. Just because you have zombies in a movie doesn't make it a good movie. You have to care about the characters. It has to go good, and the story is so smooth. It's really nice. It's neat that they do like a little animation thing in the cut scenes. It's done in a way that works. The last one that I have on this list, and because I wanted to name just like an indie film in there, it's The Hatred. There's this girl that's I believe she's hunting Confederate soldiers. It's in the snow. Actually, her dad is the one that makes the film. I had talked to them. They're sweet people. They're from New York, but it's kind of metal. it's the only way that I can, that I can name this how this movie goes. But yeah, it's The Hatred is one other. But there are so many, and then you got TV shows that have elements. I named The English. I think that Hell on Wheels is fantastic. It's probably one of my favorite gritty series.
John Worth was the showrunner on that, and he was also the showrunner on Hap and Leonard, that my series. So we talked a little bit about Hell on Wheels. I really enjoyed it up to a certain point, and I think when they Common got out of it, I think it was over. Before that, it was almost like Hap and Leonard. Because it had that relationship between those two guys that normally would not have had a relationship, especially during that era. So it was a very good series, but throw John Worth some credit there for being the showrunner on that, and as well my series for the second and third season anyway.
Did you have a favorite moment in it? My favorite was when the lady preacher shot the guy dead.
I had so many favorite moments. I don't think there was a singular moment that I remember more than others, but I just thought that was a really, really good Western. And, I think it satisfied my realistic Western taste and there had some weird moments. I wouldn't call it a weird Western, but I would call it a sort of unusual Western, that's for sure. But it was actually based on stuff that people just don't do much in the way of film about, the building the railroad and all of the people that built the railroad. A lot of that's not used in, normal Westerns and old Western movies and things. It's just not there. And so it was nice to see all that.
Well, so
Frank, I told you I made notes. The next stuff's about books. If anybody wants to say anything about films, I don't want to run off.
No. I think I've seen a lot of the ones you've mentioned, and I haven't seen a lot of the ones, and I've started a few I didn't like that you liked, but nonetheless, that's not the point. The point is there's a lot of stuff there. And when I was a kid, you had, like I said, was it Dracula meets Billy the Kid, and Frankenstein meets Jesse James' daughter, something like that, or Jesse James' daughter meets Frankenstein. The Beast of Hollow Mountain, a great one was Valley of the Gwangi. I really liked it, but was it. There were a handful of those things that came out during the heyday of Westerns, but they weren't really like they are now. You really can. People say, well, they don't make Westerns anymore. I go, well, yeah, actually they do. They not only make weird Westerns, they make a lot of Westerns. They're streaming. You don't see a whole lot in films these days. You don't see a whole lot of films of much anything besides Marvel movies. But another one that's really good, and I wouldn't call it a weird Western, but is The Homesman, which is written. It's the same guy that wrote The Shootist, Glendon Swarthout. And The Shootist is one of my favorite Western novels, and it's also one of those great Western movies. But as long as we're getting over into Westerns in general, I thought I would point to those two that aren't horror Westerns and say you should read those novels as well as see the film. And I think the film was made for streaming, for television, where The Shootist, of course, was made in the 70s. It was John Wayne's last picture. And it's kind of a tribute to his career in many ways. And the screenplay was written by Glendon Swarthout's son, and it's a much more upbeat film than the book is. The book's much darker and has a darker ending than the film, but they're both just delicious, and I think that if you're really interested in Westerns, you ought to check those out. And The Homesman, Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic in that, as he was in The Missing. Did anybody ever see The Missing, which is a weird Western? The guy has these weird trips on, they have a Native American shaman who is using all kinds of bad mojo on these guys, and it's just it's based on a novel I read of a different name, and I'm having a hard time. Thomas somebody wrote, I can't remember the name of the novel, but if you get a chance, see The Missing, because it's Tommy Lee Jones and it's just fantastic. But guys, I got to run. I hate to do it, but I got to jump.
Oh, okay.
My pit bull wants to go out. He's over here going,
Joe, I appreciate you.
Yeah, hey man, I appreciate you guys. I hope I didn't talk too much. I'm sorry I get excited.
You did awesome.
No. You're giving your sage advice and wisdom.
Not at all.
Thank you, Joe. We really appreciate it. I'll let you go and take care of your pit bull. Yep. Thank you. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, wisdom from Joe there. I really, man, he kind of has my head spinning a little bit. Some of that, but that was some really, really good stuff.
Writer and such
man, yeah, he is.
He's a really well-rounded guy, Joe is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He knows everything. He reminds me of you, BL. I mean, when I talk to you, my head spins because you bring so much, not only from, I guess the modern aspect, from the literature and the film standpoint, but also the historical. You're so well versed in the history. I mean, I read a lot of history books, but I think I've forgotten more than I've remembered, and I could listen to you and Joe, for hours and never be bored. So
once you get the history bug, it's really difficult to get rid of it. It's just always this constant itch. I mean, you're just always kind of just you'll run down one rabbit hole after another. Mm-hmm. Is what we end up doing. Well, so Chuck, what's your favorite monster? I guess I'm just kind of curious if you have
I guess,
like a favorite one.
Yeah, hands down, it's got to be Bigfoot.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna talk some Bigfoot then. Okay,
I love Sasquatch, but
well, so what's your theories about it? Do you think it could be? Do you think maybe? Do you think it's a cultural thing we're projecting, or what's your thoughts on it?
No, I have no doubt that that there's history there, that it's real. Now, between the lines, you can debate all kinds of stuff, about the woo-woo, and there's lots of things with lights, and orbs being associated with Sasquatch and stuff. But I mean, it goes back in time. Teddy Roosevelt, had mentioned it in his memoirs in traveling the country. Obviously, the Native Americans have plenty of stories and totems to it. I think it's ubiquitous, outside of the U.S. I mean, if you look at, the Wowie in Australia, and the Yeti in Nepal, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think that it's something that's real, but to what extent? Is it an ape or some kind of hominid, or is it something that walks through dimensions? That's debatable, and I'm not sure where I stand on that. I'm open to interpretation on that, but I love anything, any story. I podcasts, books, I soak it up. So,
do you follow Bob Geimlin? His YouTube channel at all? Hi, I'm Bob Geimlin.
No,
I don't know if that's ringing a bell.
No, I don't.
That's probably one of the highest quality. Yeah.
I don't do a lot of the YouTube. I'm just starting to get into YouTube type shows lately.
Missing out, bro.
I do a lot more podcasts and stuff. Yeah, I know. Obviously, because when I started watching some of the guests that you have here, Megan Stockton and BL, obviously, and
two great guests,
awesome
BL,
and really
two great ones.
Jeff, I am wearing her pin, by the way. I don't know if you know that. That's her Bad Luck Cat pin. That stays on my Juilliard hoodie. I didn't go there. I'm just a fan.
Awesome. Whenever I had Jeff Kripal on,
what's your favorite monsters?
Werewolf, hands down for me.
You go for it.
That is it. Werewolf, hands down. I think there's something so primal about it. I mean, it's kind of like the vampire, where it's traveled every single human culture around the world. And for me, whenever I was growing up, I was never really afraid of Dracula because, hey, Dracula's cool, and if I wear a cross or something. Now, I was raised on the Hammer films, not before, the vampires, they became a virus or something. But a zombie, I was never scared, I was never afraid of them. But a werewolf, oh my gosh, they're so powerful. Just a raw force of nature, just moving. As soon as a werewolf is in a scene, there's no rationalizing with it. Like, with the vampire, your totems, they're not going to do anything with it. And whenever I was a little boy, I used to check out books in the library about werewolves, and I would read about, the legends from Western Europe. And I was scared out of my wits' end to discover that the silver bullet and full moon was Hollywood, that the original legends of werewolf could change whenever they wanted to. And just the esoteric and metaphysical, the dimensions, behind the myths, just absolutely terrified me. So for Frank Shumpert, hands down, I think the werewolf, that's scary as hell.
The transformation always scared the crap out of me because I had a tiny black and white TV with rabbit ears. Most people watching this don't even know what that means. And I would sneak and watch the Universal monster movies in the middle of the night without my parents knowing, and on like Channel 9 or whatever, and the transformation of Lon Chaney Jr. or Oliver Reed and stuff, the werewolf transformation I think scared me more than anything else when it comes to film.
Well, so there's such a spiritual, the transformation part, there's such a spiritual kind of side to it, like this deep demonic presence. Their eyes will turn a different color and, just their bones changing. And it's like, part of the horror of it, it isn't just the physical, but it's this internal world, like they are changing internally. It's just a visceral and primal fear, I guess. And I just get a kick out of it. I love reading about them. Now, the movie that scared the crap out of me as a kid was The Howling, the original, The Howling, that was based on Gary Brandener's book. And I forget who directed it. I don't know if BL can help me out with that. But it was one of the very, so the same guy who did the special effects for The Howling was the second person in charge of the special effects for the movie The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing. And if you ever watch The Thing, there's always this tension between showing it in the full light and keeping it in the shadows. And apparently that was due to the creative conflict between the guy who was doing the monster for The Thing and the fella that did the special effects for The Howling. And the guy that did The Howling was like, no, we don't want to show it in the full light. We need some shadow. So they were constantly going back and forth in that. But BL, how about you, sir? What's your favorite monster?
Well, I was trying to find the answer to your Howling question.
The Howling, yeah. I'll have to look it up.
So, I'll write these things, and I've got other authors that are like, man, you give me nightmares. I really think to myself about what's really scary. A lot of times it's just a thought. It's when you feel like you're not in control. It's when you feel like there's nothing you can do. The neighbors aren't home, whatnot. I tend to skew towards human monsters. I like monsters that you don't really know everything about because that's creepier, that you hear a noise behind you and you think, what was that? I tend to focus on the demonic. I really liked the short film that they made that the movie Lights Out was based on. Where when you flipped out the lights, this thing was there, but then you flipped them off and it wasn't there because that's just creepy to see this dark, shadowy figure coming at you and everything. It's really a neat thing. In my God Walks the Dark Hills series, which, you know, all of my books are all interconnected. I overthink everything. There are heavy nodes of Slender Man in that, even though a lot of that goes Spring Hill Jack and Elsa Bone and a lot of other things, the Devil of Leeds and whatnot tie into it. The Shadow Man, one of the characters, is being called that, as though I'm writing an origin story.
Awesome.
You know, just all kinds of things like that. I think that they're interesting. That's just where I kind of go. I kind of go with the supernatural angle of stuff. You know, there's a lot of people that tell me I will not watch The Exorcist. Those are more of the movies that I like. You know, I'll take the Bible and I'll insert it in something and insert history and everything. And I think that you can just go lots of places with that. And you know, I mean, I'm just, my background and all, I'm just so church. I've had people ask me seriously when Walking Dead came out. They said, where in the Bible does it talk about the zombie apocalypse? And they were serious. And I'm like, it doesn't. It's a show.
They're the book of George Romero,
people would justify it by pulling these scriptures out. You need to calm down. You know, there is no prophetic telling of a zombie apocalypse in the King James Bible.
You know what? But they'll read the 90% so sad about that?
Because that's what people would do.
You know what? Well, do you know what's so sad about that question, BL? Is that for, you know, whoever was asking you, whoever was asking you the question about, you know, where in the Bible is there a zombie, you know, the zombie apocalypse, and their little world,
and they meant it.
Zombies are real. I mean, it's like, I was thinking, I was like, you know, in their world, it's going to happen. I was like, wow, I wonder what that.
Well, you know, the thing is, they are real, just not like that in the movies.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. You know? In Haiti, right?
A lot of talk about voodoo, serpent in the rainbow, and all kinds of crazy, you know, stuff like that. But
where you can't feed them salt. That's
I like White Zombie. I have
that is a good
movie, but
that was a great movie. Very, very good movie. Yeah, I like it.
And the band.
The band is good too.
I know them too.
Oh, I mean, Rob Zombie's good, and so is Boris Karloff. So, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, House of a Thousand Corpses was good. That was like his masterpiece, I think, as far as his movies. I didn't like his remake of Halloween, but you don't really want to try and remake a John Carpenter movie.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I thought
it's not gonna be favorable.
Well, I thought that what was it, guys? The 2014 or 16 remake of The Thing, or it was a prequel, I think, to John Carpenter's the Thing that came out, which they wouldn't let him around the movie at all. He gave an interview like apparently they never even called him. And they were using some of his original sets and everything for it. But the prequel, I mean, it was just a monster movie is what it was. I mean, it wasn't The Thing, So, but anyway, that was it. Well, hey fellas, it has been a really, really cool night. Really, really cool, some conversations that we had going on here. And I would like to encourage all of the viewers and listeners to check out the show notes. Follow the links to BL Blankenship, Chuck Buda, and Joe as well. And if you are so inclined, buy a copy of their book and leave them a review. As I said before, we're living, I believe, in another golden age of writing and reading. And I know what Joe was saying about gatekeepers, but the gatekeepers are readers now. It's no longer New York City. It is readers now. And I believe that the cream will rise to the top. That's what I believe. So closing comments, Chuck?
It's like music.
Yes. Go on. Yeah. Sounds like an analogy's coming.
You've got MP3s now. You don't have to buy a whole album. You can just buy the song that you want.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And all that. But yeah, it's different. The landscape has changed. And like I said, there's a ton of books. There are prominent authors that have written Western horror. Let me rifle them off really fast. Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Crossing, Jack Ketchum. Shadow on the Sun, Richard Matheson, and also made during the time period that would make it Western horror. A Color, is it A Color or The Color? Out of Space.
That's right. H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft, yes.
All right.
So, I mean, all of those are that. Blood Meridian is one of my favorites. The Shadow on the Sun, Matheson. It is about a night doctor that calls up this spirit, demon thing to get people. I don't honestly remember what The Crossing is about. I like Jack Ketchum a lot. I have read it. It's been a while. There's some blood and there's some gore in that. I know that shocks people that Jack Ketchum would have anything extreme at all. And Color to Space, the people are going insane. It's a virus that goes to worlds and kills it, and they're just going out of their minds. I think it's Massachusetts. It's like a fictitious town.
Arkham, Massachusetts.
But there's so much good stuff. Yeah, there's so much good stuff. Death's Head Press, people find me. People that read me find Death's Head Press. We're all kind of linked to one another. Chuck is going to be in an anthology that I'm spearheading next year called Shut Up and Bleed.
That's right. I saw that.
A lot of that has to do with him being awesome.
I like that. What a great one. Chuck, would you like to close this out, sir? Closing thoughts or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reiterate. I could listen to BL and Joe, all day, any day. Oh, man, and I appreciate you allowing us to get together and talk. And thank you, BL, again, for really spearheading, getting us all together and stuff. I think this was great. We obviously all share a love of horror and Westerns. And, there's just so much there's so much richness there, and there's so much more to come. And I'm fired up. I can't wait for your anthology. I'm actually in the middle of my story. It's based on a Wasp, because I'm an old 80s hair metal dude, to show my age, based on an old Wasp song or album, Blind in Texas. So, and it's going to be very weird and very Western. So, but yeah, I'm fired up for it, and I think everybody should check out BL's stuff, and obviously Joe's. The Thicket is great, and all the stuff that he's done. So, yeah.
Well, we're gonna have to do this again, Jim.
That's it. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you are welcome. All right.
Anytime.
All right. Adios. I'll see you. Thank you, guys.